Hey, I think I'm live. All right. Do this almost every week now, and eh, every now and then I'm not entirely certain if YouTube has gone live yet or not. Every single time I hit the live button, you never know. But uh, happy weekend. Hope everybody's doing well. Uh, yeah. So today we're going to be tying the first part or the body. So this is going to be another two-part fly, and today we're going to be tying the body of Herl by Kelson. And starting here from bare hook, and I'm just adding my gut eye because I decided that I didn't like the hook that I had prepared for today. So I am starting from scratch again. Um, as normal, few announcements. If you enjoy what I'm doing and want to see more of my work, check out my Instagram. It is at Just Wondering Brad on Instagram. Yes. And if you want to support the channel or purchase any of the flies that you see me tie here, well, you can check out the Etsy shop. It is Studio1213 on Etsy. And most of the flies that I've tied here on stream can be found there. I tend not to put the freestyle flies up for sale just because, you have to pay a listing fee, and the freestyle flies don't usually get a whole lot of traction, not even a whole lot of views on Etsy. So I don't tend to put those up. But if you are interested in purchasing one, just message me through Etsy, and I can send you photos of the flies that are available. Or you can message me through Instagram. But then I'll create a. If you message me through Etsy, I will create a special private listing for you and only you, where you can purchase, whatever flies you want that you've seen me tie. Uh, what else? What else can I tell you? Excuse me. Must be proper. Yeah. So this week's been a little bit weird. Gotten a new job. Working in public health. I don't start till next week though, so this week has just been doing all the usual onboarding stuff. Background check, financials, that sort of thing. So yeah, so that's been kind of good and bad. Lots of, good and just the usual tension of starting a new position. The other thing that I've been working on this week is bringing back a podcast idea that I had. Since I work in public health, and right now everything's just a little bit crazy. I've been working on bringing back an idea that I had for a podcast, and I've been doing it on YouTube as a live stream. So it's a little bit more off the cuff. It's a little less organized than I had in mind when I originally started. But it's a little bit more conversational, and I think that can also be a very excellent way to connect with people on some very difficult and complicated subjects. So you can check that out. It's Airborne Microbiologist. I think if you just search for it, you can find it. And that's my kind of sciencey thing. And I probably do that once every week and a half or so. I'm hoping to bring on some really great experts that I know as guests and do some interviews. So that hopefully will do a little bit of growing and be a useful resource for people to hang out, get their questions answered, ask questions, and that sort of thing. So So like I said, I'm starting from the underbody with this fly because I didn't like the hook that I had prepped. I had actually started with an underbody, gut eye underbody, all that um, previously, but then I was sitting there thinking about it. I was like, yeah, this one's not going to work so well, and I'll tell you why. So the pearl by Kelson is one of those flies that has a tag that is entirely tinsel. It calls for a gold twist tag, and the challenge with that is, you know, gold twist is fine gold twist, is especially like this stuff right here. Uh, it takes a lot of it if you're going to do an entire tag or an entire section with it. Um, and it's my opinion, but like really long sections of really fine gold twist can look, I don't know, kind of flat or and even very messy, um, depending on how nice your twist is, how well it's tied in, and so I much prefer to tie gold, entire, gold or silver twist tags, about half the length of what I would tie in a floss tag. And one of the things, the way I do my underbodies is I actually run the underbody under the tag, all the way under the tag, so that the tag itself has some taper to it. And so when I tied the underbody for the stream today, and I did that yesterday, just to do some prep. Uh, I had tied the. I wasn't quite sure which fly I wanted to tie, and I just kind of out of habit tied the underbody um, to like a floss tag length, if you will, and then that of course meant that it was too long for the pearl when I decided that I wanted to do the pearl today. So just making sure this is all even and flat. I'm gonna retie my underbody here. Um, but that's okay. It gives me a little bit of time to chat with y'all. If you have any questions, feel free to pop it in the stream chat. Um, like I say, fly tying shows, I might not be able to look up and see your question or answer your question, but please feel free to put it in the chat and I will answer it when I can. So yeah, so this is going to be a slightly shorter underbody just to accommodate the fact that I'm going to tie a slightly shorter tag because it's all tinsel. Um, and you've seen me tie underbodies before. It's always just flat thread. This is Vivus gel spun. I've said this before. It's not my favorite because it tends to be very slippery on the hook, especially when you're trying to do a really thick underbody. But it doesn't compress like ultra, or there's like uni stretch. So I don't use gel spun all that much, just because of that. But right now it's kind of what I've got. For some reason, white uni stretch has kind of become difficult to find. So hopefully I'll be able to find some more. So that's my favorite stuff for underbodies. But this will do. All right, that's a little bit better. So this, let's see, just looking at the recipe real quick. So this fly has embossed silver tinsel, a two section or two joint, as we would call it. Body, it's one joint of silver embossed tinsel, and then the other one is black silk. Um, of course, because I'm doing a tinsel underbody, you want to be extra careful to make it smooth underneath. Uh, with silks, you can kind of fill in some of the bumps and hills that you get. with your underbody. But with tinsel, because it's flat and it's very, relatively speaking, compared to floss, kind of rigid, um, it shows, or it tends to show, all of those little hills and valleys a lot easier than uh, than floss. So you want to be a little bit extra careful to make sure that your underbody is very even under a tinsel body. Hello, computer. All right. So the other thing that makes this fly somewhat unusual is that it has a a yellow toucan tail. That's not so common. It's a little bit more common in some of the older flies, like from Blacker, or I think Francis has a few. Kelson, relatively speaking, I should say, as a proportion of the flies that are listed in his book, um, I think it's a little bit more rare. Although I think in actual number, there's probably more, just because Kelson lists so many patterns. Just gonna tie in my gold twist. This is antique gold twist. I get most of my antique tinsels from just the internet. eBay is a great resource. There is a company now. It used to be out of New York, and they used to actually have a brick and mortar storefront in New York City. But I think they are now out of California. I think either the children took over or something. Um, but Tinsel Trading Company is a great, uh, I guess, resource. They deal in all sorts of like uh, metal threads, as they would have been called, um, tinsels, lace, ribbon. Really great resource for kind of, and they're all vintage. They're all antique, which is really great. Uh, Great resources for fly tires. For a while, they offered a 6 spool uh, sampler of kind of their popular tinsels. So I got one of those back, many years ago, and it's lasted me a nice long time. Come with these nice vintage stickers and on these nice spools. You get quite a bit of tinsel for your money, and it's all, like I said, it's all antique, so it's really really great. Um, but they're now based out of California, so they no longer have the storefront in New York City. I don't think. But yeah, if you do end up going to Tinsel Trading Company and purchasing some tinsel, tell them that Just Wondering Brad on Instagram uh, sent you. Um, I'm not sponsored by them, but sure would be great. No, I love what they do. I'm glad that somebody is doing, um, you know, collecting and distributing. Oops, sorry, just bumped the mic. Collecting and distributing these tinsels. It's a really kind of nice resource to be able to have for fly tying, certainly. I don't know. I haven't checked recently to see if they offer the 6 spool sampler anymore. But if they do, grab one. It'll last you a long time, and you get some great antique tinsels for, it's a nice variety for a pretty good price. And I think it's like um, I don't know. I want to say it's $30 for the 6 spools, which sounds like a lot for a sampler, but you have to remember that you actually get quite a bit of tinsel for it, and you also, it's antique tinsel. Um, you could buy like a 200, or I don't know, what is it, a 30 or 40 yard spool for $20. But then you have a 30-yard spool of a single kind of tinsel, and that's somewhat less useful. So yeah, the variety pack's great if you just want some antique tinsels to tie with. I think when I got it, it was a gold, like a medium sized or large size gold and gold oval and silver oval, and then there was a fine gold twist, embossed silver, two embossed silvers, an embossed gold, and a silver lace. And the lace is kind of useful because it's a 3-ply lace, and you can take it and either separate out the plies if you're shooting for a silver twist or finer silver twist, or you can use the lace as is. Um, right, so I'm going to be using a Toucan substitute. And I'm going to be using my favorite Toucan substitute. This is actually dyed swan breast feather. Uh, so yeah, so this is swan breast feather that has been dyed kind of a slightly brighter than toucan yellow, admittedly, but it works well. It looks great. It's kind of got the right amount of like fluffiness that you would get from toucan. Need to look something up because I know there's actually a species of swan which is considered invasive. The mute swan. That's right. Uh, so the mute swan is considered invasive, and it's distinctive because of its beak. And I forget exactly what the attribute is. It's either the one that is orange or entirely black, and I forget. Not to be confused with native trumpeter swans. Um, but if you do see a mute swan, I know in some states like Pennsylvania, you can actually shoot uh, mute swans as part of your waterfowl bag limit during waterfowl season. Or I should say, you can shoot them and they don't count against your waterfowl. Now, you have to be very, very careful because the native trumpeter swan is protected. And if you shoot one of those, that's a huge fine. They take away your hunting license. Don't do it. But the mute swan, because it's invasive and it's kind of pushing native waterfowl species out of their habitats, it is considered a nuisance, and so you can take them during waterfowl season. So, for those of you who are looking for a source of a good toucan substitute that is readily available, you might consider something such as dyed mute swan breast feathers, which this is. Certainly, it's easier to get your hands on, and toucan has kind of. I don't know like the protected status of toucan. I assume some species are threatened or endangered, and others aren't. I'm not entirely up on my site's lists for toucans, but if you can't find toucan, dyed yellow swan works great. And as you noticed, just to make it a little bit easier to tie in, I took I took the feathers, ran them through some saliva dampened fingers, and that just makes it so that it's not so poof, fluffy when tying them in. All right. The tail is veiled by some teal and a small chatterer feather. Now, as usual, for my chatterer, I'm going to be using a sub, and that sub will be, as usual, Eurasian kingfisher. because chatter is definitely difficult to find here in the United States. Just gonna toss on some fibers of teal. Everything goes on with a soft loop just to make sure it doesn't roll over. And again, or I should say, this is kind of because of the nature of the materials being used in this tail, it is kind of more of like a mixed tail than like a married veiling tail. All right, chatterer. And what we got here? One small chatterer, one very small chatterer. No, okay, it's not terrible. Just gonna trim this up a little bit. Gonna give it a little bit of a crimp. So it doesn't push the other tail elements down. Where'd it go? Yeah, these small tail veilings can be a little bit fiddly. They are very beautiful. Yeah, so there are many differences. So, for example, Eurasian jay and Eurasian kingfisher are commonly used in fly tying because they're not considered endangered, whereas their American counterparts are either considered protected or threatened. So I would not use American kingfisher. That would be somewhat unadvisable. And I certainly would not use blue jay or American blue jay. Because we have, various songbird acts, which prevent people from possessing. We have the various wildlife protection acts. So it's just something to be aware of if you're, a feather collector, or if you are come across a feather you're not familiar with. Just be aware that you got to pay attention to protected status. Okay, so next is a butt of black herl. Of course, I'm going to use my very nicely black dyed ostrich herl from John McLean. All right, wind my thread out of the way. Attach. All right, so one of the things I do with my herl, and you see me do it, and I think I've talked about it, but I don't think I've explained it fully. One of the things that makes herl butts and herl heads very messy is if any of the fibers get trapped under the stem of the herl going forward. And this is true of hackles or any other thing that you wrap where it's fuzzy. You always want the fibers, to point rearward. And this is true of doving brushes as well. It's really messy and it looks really bad if the fibers are going forward, unless that's the look you're going for. So what I like to do is I like to take the fibers of a herl and I just kind of gently sweep them to the rear. I'm not folding the herl, although you could, and I've seen people do it, But I don't think you have to fold the herl. I just want to make sure that none of the fibers are stuck going forward, because that's what makes a herl butt look messy. And there's nothing worse than a messy butt. Yeah, somebody clip that. So as you can see, and if you want, as you wrap, you can just pull the herls back so that you don't wrap over them. But I think you don't have to do that if you've treated your herl correctly when tying it in. Treat her nice. All right, couple turns, tie it off, and that makes a really nice herl butt. One additional channel announcement. I've started working on some videos. I will hopefully be able to produce, and we'll see again how much time I have now that I've started this new job. But I'm hoping to produce a series of about 10-minute basics videos, tying, a tip and tag, or tying in like a gut, eye, and underbody. So hopefully, again, we'll see how much time I have to do it. But I've kind of gotten a setup that I like, that works for me. So I think we can start making some more edited videos instead of just these live streams. Yeah, and hopefully that will give people a little bit better view, because I know like this view here is not so ideal for people who are wanting to learn techniques. It might be okay. You can see how my hands move around the vise, but then also like put my hands here while I'm doing something, you can't see it. So I've got a GoPro which goes like right here, and then I can edit some video. Hopefully that'll work well. The only thing I don't like about filming on a GoPro is the focus is somewhat difficult. So if there's any texture in the background at all, it won't focus on the hook right here in front of it. So it's not the ideal kind of close up camera, but it's small enough where it doesn't get in the way of my tying. Because it wouldn't do the viewer any good for me to tie something, and because of the camera I had to adjust my hand angle. I want to show you exactly how I hold my hands and where I place them, because that's probably more useful in terms of tying instruction. Okay, so the first joint, or the first section of the body, is silver embossed tinsel, and it's veiled, or as Kelson says, butted, above and below with Indian crow. Of course, I'm going to use red weaver as my Indian crow sub. Just got my thread all. So I'm just very carefully, as flat as possible, tying, just winding my thread forward to get it to where I want to put the mid body joint. One of the tricks, just in terms of like proportions and figuring out proportions, is that the rearmost joint should be ever so slightly shorter. I know it should be, technically should be half and half, but because the front joint oftentimes gets veiled or overshadowed by the wing and the wing components, if you make it just a little bit longer than the rear joint, it'll appear to be equal proportions in the finished fly. So I'm going to make this rear joint just a little bit shorter. It also helps me save a little bit of materials. Um, and I have this very nice vintage uh, embossed silver tinsel from Tinsel Trading Company. So I'm tying with all vintage tinsels from Tinsel Trading Company today because why not? I have them. And also, I happen to have the right ones. Sometimes I'll use a mix of modern, Lagarten, and tinsel trading if I don't have the proper tinsels. But today I have all the proper tinsels or all the proper antique tinsels uh, from Tinsel Trading Company. So, and I will say this is not the only antique tinsel that I use and own and use. I of course have antique tinsels from other sources, but in terms of starter uh, samplers, I guess samplers of sets, you really can't go wrong with the Tinsel Trading Company sampler. If they still have it, I hope they do. It's so super useful, and they are very, very beautiful tinsels. Now, as usual, I'm going to do a 2-layer tinsel, so I'm going to wind down and wind back. Um, for those of you who have not seen me do a tinsel body, this helps with just coverage. So if you were to wind a single layer of tinsel, if you have any gaps in between, those gaps will you know, show up because of the white thread underneath, or black thread, or any color thread really. But if you wrap 2 layers of tinsel, you just get that little extra bit of coverage, and you minimize the amount of thread underbody that shows in the gaps between. Because, especially with vintage tinsel, sometimes the tinsel has little kinks or like little, imperfections in it that really kind of make it difficult to wrap perfect side by side wraps. And so doing 2 layers just helps minimize the gaps that you can see between those flaws. And if I will say, if I were tying a fishing quality fly, I wouldn't bother doing 2 layers of tinsel. One, it's a bit of a waste on a fishing fly, and two, if the fish's teeth do cut the tinsel, then you're just going to end up with a very long strand of tinsel flapping behind or unwinding from your fly and flapping behind as you retrieve. So in that case, it's better to tie a single layer and add a rib on top, because the rib adds a little bit of robustness. And also the single layer, just, again, you're not wasting quite so much tinsel. Okay. And because this has a mid-body joint, um, it'll have a mid-body butt of herl. I'm not too concerned about a little bit of extra bulk here, right here in the middle. Yeah. Just want to make sure everything is secure. All right. Let's see. I need red weaver for the veiling. let me just close the office door. I can hear my wife starting to clean, so be right back. Okay. So red weaver, the usual substitute for Indian crow. And again, for those of you who are interested in like responsible fly tying, red weaver generally, in my experience, I should say it's not always true, but in my experience, the source of red weaver are um, decommissioned or uh, taxidermy mounts from like museums. So museums sometimes have to replace their taxidermy mounts. If they get old or damaged, and I don't know the exact lines of how you acquire them. I'm sure it's through some kind of major donation to the museum, but you can acquire, uh, you know, the taxidermy mounts, and it's kind of a great way to recycle uh, taxidermy mounts that would otherwise be discarded. So I'm just going to tie and I'm going to tie it a little bit long so that it overlaps the rearmost butt. So I just kind of place it underneath and then I hold it and give it a wrap. All right. So I'm just holding it in place with one finger or two fingers. And again, take a little bit of saliva and just kind of stick all the fibers together so that it's easier to tie on. Again, a little bit long. Just going to hold it in place. One soft loop. Stick it in place. And then, as usual, I'm going to wax the thread, bind everything down with a couple more firm wraps, and that is the veilings. Now, I just want to check and make sure that they're equal length. This does look a little bit goofy if one is a little bit longer than the other. And not too much there. And you just want to make sure they are straight down the body. And I'm going to give it a couple of turns. Wax thread. And, as always, the wax thread helps control all the extra fuzz as well. Trim. Okay. Let's make sure they are well and truly centered for binding down the remains of their butt ends. Okay. So there we go. Great. Now for the mid joint butt. Just gonna give them a little bit of wax. Going up to the front. Again, I'm just going to ensure that the herl is not going to get trapped in the wrong direction. Wind. Second herl butt. Now, if you do a mid joint or a mid body herl butt, it needs to be as thick as the tail, as the tail end butt. Otherwise, it won't look quite right. Okay. All right. Next is a joint of black silk ribbed with gold oval tinsel and a black hackle. Now it says natural black hackle. I don't have natural black hackle. I have dyed black hackle, so that's what I'm going to use. So now, normally, if I were tying a hackle in, I would tie it in so that it would start with the second turn of rib. But because this is going to be because this joint of the body is starting right in the middle, and two, it's going to be really short. Um, you're only going to get about 3 turns in. I'm actually going to start it right at the joint. I'm going to tie in the hackle and the rib at the same time at the joint. So utilizing the principle of first on, last down, or last wrapped, I'm going to tie in the hackle first, and this is going to go in at about 7:30 on the body. Of course, hackles have the glossy outside and the dull inside. The dull inside goes up against the hook, and that goes on at 7:30, as mentioned. And then the rib, which is this very nice kind of medium large gold oval tinsel from Tinsel Trading Company, is going to go down next. And this will go on at about 8 o'clock on the hook. So working my way around the hook, if you think of it as a clock face, first thing on is the last down. So since I want the hackle to follow the rib in this joint, the hackle goes on first at 7:30, and the rib goes on at approximately 8. And of course, it's going to be a little bit fiddly because okay. A little bit fiddly because you have to work around a hackle. That's okay. We'll just wind everything, I should say, cover everything with side-by-side wraps all the way up to the front. Just make sure that the hackle and the rib don't shift and they stay where they're tied in. Because if the rib if the tag end of the rib or the butt end of the rib shifts around to the bottom of the hook, it can create a little extra bulk, which will add a little bit of a bump into your floss body. And we're just going to bind it all the way up to where we want the body joint to stop, which is about right here. Let's see. This doesn't have a herl head, so I can crowd the eye a little bit more. And also, we don't need a whole lot of black silk for this because it is a short joint. But we do want to use, so I'm actually going to use 2-ply. So this is 2-ply of Legarten black silk. I'm going to use 2-ply because one thing is if you tie on flat tinsel versus flat silk, the flat silk is always going to be a little bit flatter. And so I want there to be a nice taper from rear to front. And because this had flat silver tinsel and it has 2 layers of it, I need just a little bit extra bulk in the silk end, or with the silk, to make up for that, or to make that taper. So I'm going to use 2 layers just so I get a little bit extra bulk in the silk. And then, of course, it should taper back down towards the eye. So go. Normally I would just tie with a single ply or a single strand of silk, but in this case I'm trying to compensate for the tinsel, because otherwise you end up with like a really kind of skinny front joint or body joint, and that can seem a little bit weird. Also, black silk, again, because darker colors tend to not to have as much visual impact in flies. The dark silk, the black silk front end, is going to have a little bit less of a visual impact than the embossed silver uh, rear joint. So by giving it just a little bit more bulk, giving it just a little bit more visual impact, and we just have to remember that the throat hackle is J, and so that's going to take up a little bit extra space compared to like a chicken hackle. So just give it a little extra room when you're tying things in. Okay. Now, first thing down again is the rib. So I'm just going to do. I'm actually going to try and get. Well, it's only going to be 3 turns. I'm going to try and get 3 full turns and tie off the rib underneath the hook instead of the back side of the hook. Okay. Trim that. Now I'm going to take the hackle and I'm going to fold it. Again, I'm just pulling the hackle away from the hook shank and then sweeping the fibers all to one side of the hackle stem. Now I have to be very careful. I happen to know that the hackles off of this neck are particularly fragile, or particularly thin stemmed. So just be careful. Do it gently. You don't need to pull too hard. And so wrap. Just make sure all of the fibers face to the rear. Again, you don't want any fibers facing forward. Okay, there's just one fiber that doesn't want to go backwards. There we go. Always sweeping to the rear. Following precisely the back end or the rear trailing edge of the rib, and then just gently tying it off. Again, I'm wiggling my thread backwards and forwards because that just gets it through the hackle fibers, and I don't trap as many under the thread when tying down the hackle. Okay. Just going to bind everything down as tightly as possible, and because I used wax thread under to tie in the blind eye, the gut eye, I don't have to wax my thread again. Although it wouldn't hurt. All right, so just gonna bring my thread back. Now we're gonna add the J throat, and that'll be it for today. Again, this is just the body. We'll do the wing next week, I think. I should be able to stream next Saturday. With the new job and some various other commitments, there will be some Saturdays. I think I've mentioned this before. There'll be some Saturdays where I won't be able to stream, but next Saturday will be a stream day. And let me find a hackle. J hackle. And these are not the longest J hackles, and I try to make it so that J hackle is pretty close, but these are, no, that's pretty good. All right, so this one. So like I mentioned, Eurasian jays are considered a nuisance in Europe. There's plenty of them. They're not endangered. This is the kind of jay that you want to use for your salmon flies, not American blue jay. And to prep a jay feather, I just strip away the half of the feather that doesn't have the blue barring and coloring. And I just tie it in like a normal hackle. Now I will say, I mentioned this before. Actually, let me wax my thread here. I mentioned this before. You get very few blue barred feathers on a jay hackle. So you do want to be able to use both the left and the rights, which means, half of the hackles or half of the jay hackles you tie in, you're actually going to wind in the opposite direction you would normally, which is fine. It's nice to have that little bit of ambidexterity, just to be a little bit more efficient with your materials. Tip. I'm only going to get about 2, maybe 3 turns here. Jay hackles tend to have very thick stems, so it can be a little bit of a pain to tie in. All right, so there's the J hackle. Just going to give it a little bit more. So one thing I've mentioned about J hackles is they have a very thick stem, and so when you go to tie in the wing, if you have that stem, your wing has to go up and over that stem, or it'll lay flat against the body. Well, one way around it, and I'm not one of those tires that is kind of crazy about getting super tiny heads on their flies, one way around it is to simply just add a little bit of extra thread bulk to make up for that extra bump you'll need. So I don't need that much. Okay, and then I'm just going to flatten out my thread, wind it to the front, just to give it a nice slope. And I'm going to whip off my white thread, because when I go to tie in the wings, I am going to switch to black thread as usual. For those who are new to the channel, I do that because the black thread is, if I miss a spot while applying head cement, the black thread won't show as well or as brightly or as obviously as the white thread. So that's kind of a useful trick. So there we go. So that is the body of, that's the body, sort of, in focus, maybe, of the Pearl by Kelson. Next week, probably next week, we'll do the wing and finish out the fly. So yeah, thanks for hanging out. A little bit of a shorter stream today. Didn't go for like an hour and a half, but yeah, I appreciate you guys hanging out with me. Anything else I want to talk about? Not that I can think of. Like I said, if you want to go check out my kind of chatty science podcast or live stream, it's Airborne Microbiologist. It's justwondering.brad on Instagram if you want to see more of my work. And if you want to support the stream and help out and or purchase any of the flies you see me tie, it's Studio1213 on Etsy. The reason why I promote my Etsy shop so heavily is a lot of these YouTube artists and streamers have Patreons where they ask for donations, and I'm not really into that. I'd rather give you something of equal value back. So these flies are, for me, are a self-sustaining hobby. It pays for itself, which is nice. But purchases of flies to the Etsy shop help keep the stream and this channel going. Yeah. What else? Oh, I've been working on I've been picking up an old hobby of mine, model making and model painting. For example, as a younger kid, I used to be very much into like tabletop wargaming. I painted. So recently, I kind of gotten back into painting the miniatures. I don't think I'm ever going to play the game quite to the extent that I used to, but painted a Warhammer 40K. This was just like one of their sampler pack minis. I don't even know if they have the sampler pack anymore, but I've had this for a while, so I painted up a mini. But one of the things that I've been seeing is the idea of a book nook. And this is a diorama which basically fits in the space of a book on a bookshelf. And so I've been working on one. And it's kind of in pieces right now, so excuse the mess. But if you go over to one of my other Instagram accounts, I have lots of Instagram accounts because I don't like having my different hobbies overlap. So, but if you go to Pen of Thomas Sylvanus, and I'll put a link or the description in below. But if you go to Pen of Thomas Sylvanus on Instagram, you can see what it looks like put together. But I took it apart because I got some more work to do on it. But essentially what I'm doing is I'm creating a medieval, like a fantasy medieval village. So here's an inn, and it's closed because of the plague. And here is like a house, a couple of houses. And there is a street scene with a sewers. And the way that this goes together, it's like a book. So this box goes together. Yeah, I called it the Plague Doctor because I have a Plague Doctor mini which will go inside. But then it sits on the bookshelf, and then you open the door, and there you can see the scene. So it's kind of cool. It's a neat idea. It definitely plays to my penchant for miniatures and diorama building. Once I get my Plague Doctor miniature painted and put together, I'll put the whole thing together, and I'll post some more pictures on my Pt.1 Sylvanus account. But that is it for now. That is all the cool stuff happening in my life. Yeah, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for tying flies with me. When all of this COVID-19 craziness is over and it's safe for us to merge into the world again, I'm hoping that we can meet up at a show, at a fly tying show. I will definitely let you guys know which shows I'll be at. I'm going to make an effort to be at maybe some of the Pennsylvania shows this year, maybe Lancaster, if they're open. I've seen a lot of gatherings, a lot of shows being pushed back even through 2021. So there's no guarantee any of that's going to happen. But when it does, we should definitely get together. So that's it for now. Thanks for hanging out. Hope you guys have a good rest of your weekend, and talk to you next week. Bye.